I'm the wife in name only to Frank, the prince of Beijing's elite social scene. While he's out partying until 2 or 3 in the morning with a girl on each arm, I'm the one who dutifully picks him up. After we get home, I turn to him and say flatly, "Kneel." Thud. Reeking of alcohol, he still knelt perfectly straight. He stuck his neck out and yelled at me. "Annie, don't take it too far. You think you can tell me to kneel and I'll just do it?" Despite his words, he stayed put, kneeling obediently on the floor. He kept muttering, "Don't be so full of yourself. We men just listen to our wives, and you just happen to be my wife. That's all. Don't you dare think I like you." I ignored him and walked over to the living room, flopping onto the couch. The housekeeper, used to this scene, brought me a fruit platter and a glass of warm milk before heading back to the kitchen to make Frank some hangover soup. I put on a movie. The lead actor happened to be my old classmate, William. About halfway through the movie, Frank's knees were clearly getting tired. He cleared his throat, trying to make some noise to get my attention. I put down my potato chips and looked over. He flashed a sycophantic smile. "Can I get up now?" I turned back to the movie, crunching on a chip, and gave a faint ahoo. Frank staggered to his feet, a little unsteady. After a moment, the housekeeper finished making the hangover soup. He carried the bowl over to me. "What are you watching? Why are you watching him again?" On screen, William was playing a snake demon, bathing half-naked in a river. Frank bristled like a cat. "They're just abs. Who doesn't have those? Annie, look at mine. Mine are bigger than his." I gave him a bored glance, offering no comment. Perhaps driven by his competitive streak, he saw I was unmoved and, through gritted teeth, added another line. "You can touch mine." I considered it and thought, why not? I patted the spot next to me on the couch, signaling for him to sit. "What's wrong? How am I supposed to touch them from way over there?" Frank's ears were bright red as he stiffened on the sofa, like a fish on a cutting board, completely at my mercy. The moment my cool fingertips came close, he flinched back. "Don't move. A little touch won't make you lose any flesh." "Okay," the man agreed, his voice tight. The movie was still playing. The film I'd been enjoying just moments ago now seemed annoyingly loud, so I grabbed the remote and turned it off. The main lights in the living room were off, leaving only a single, dim lamp. In the faint light, I could vaguely make out the well-defined lines of his muscles. I grew curious about his expression. Lifting my head, I saw his eyelashes were half lowered, and in his deep, dark eyes, a hidden current was swirling. With a sharp crack, the bowl of hangover soup fell to the floor. But right now, no one was in the mood to deal with it. Outside, the moon hung high in the sky. The bedroom light turned on, then off again. Frank gripped my slender wrist, and in the heat of the moment, he murmured a name, Dawn. I instantly kicked him off the bed. A chill filled the air. I sat up, straightened my clothes, and asked him in a cold voice, "Who is Dawn?" Frank's face went pale. He was too guilty to look me in the eye, struggling to maintain some semblance of dignity. I'll go sleep in the guest room." With that, he grabbed a blanket and fled like a coward. The night was cool. I curled up against the pillows, staring at the moon outside. This wasn't the first time I had heard that name. 6 months ago, almost overnight, my mother passed away and my family's company, the Chin Group, was on the verge of bankruptcy. To save the company, my father arranged a marriage for me with Frank. Everyone knew that Frank, the wealthy heir, and I were sworn enemies. Now that I had fallen from grace, they all assumed he was only marrying me to humiliate me. Even I thought so, but I had no choice. I knew my family was no longer what it once was. We needed Frank's support to survive, so I hid all my sharp edges. I obediently went through with the engagement and wedding, treating Frank with cautious care. At the wedding reception, Frank's friends got him pretty drunk. With the top few buttons of his shirt undone, his eyes were dark and hazy with intoxication. He pushed me onto the bed, pinning me down. One hand gripped my wrist while the other gently caressed my face. His voice was husky and dazed. Dawn, I like you so much, Dawn. But my name is Annie. So, who was Dawn? I couldn't control my temper and kicked him off the bed. The shock sobered Frank up instantly. Just like tonight, he guiltily grabbed a blanket and went to sleep in another room. I gritted my teeth. Fine, Frank. See if I care. Stay out of my room for the rest of your life. When I got up in the morning, the housekeeper had already cleaned up the spilled hangover soup. Thinking about the movie I hadn't finished last night, I snuggled into the soft, comfortable sofa to watch the rest of it. Just then, my phone rang. I answered, and Director Lee's cheerful voice came through. Annie, how are your preparations going? If everything's good, you can join the cast on set next week. Something I had been waiting for 6 months was finally happening. I couldn't help but smile. When an invitation to a banquet arrived at the house, I accepted for the first time in a long while. Since marrying Frank, I rarely attended these kinds of events. I knew that during all those years I'd spent fighting with Frank, none of the socialites in his circle had ever liked me. Now that my family's status had plummeted, I was sure they'd jump at the chance to humiliate me. That evening, I changed into a white embroidered strapless gown with a matching shawl, my hair styled in soft curls. As planned, I pushed open the doors to the banquet hall. The room immediately filled with hushed whispers. Isn't that Frank's wife? She actually dared to show up. You don't think she's here to cause a scene, do you? Don't worry, she wouldn't dare. In front of Frank, she's like a dog on a leash. I heard their words and felt nothing, but on my face, I put on the exact expression they were hoping for, timid, with a hint of defiance. I used to be the darling of Shanghai's high society. I'd been to hundreds of these parties, yet here I was, acting like I was terrified. As if I'd never seen such a grand occasion. Sure enough, the sneers on their faces deepened. I shrank into a corner, looking around with anxious, darting eyes. Discussions with my name peppered in rose and fell around me, and disdainful glances were thrown my way time and again. I bit my lip defiantly, trying to hold on to my dignity. Suddenly, the music in the hall changed. A spotlight hit the center of the stage, and all eyes turned toward it. The woman in the light had upturned, phoenix-like eyes and a dazzling smile. She gracefully tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She was the eldest daughter of the Yi family, recently returned from abroad, Dawn Yi. Even though this was her moment in the spotlight, people kept looking over at me. The reason was simple: the star of the evening and I were wearing the same dress. Dawn Yi clearly noticed the situation, and a flash of displeasure crossed her face. After she finished her brief speech, she stepped off the stage and walked straight toward me. She looked down at me. You must be the famous Mississippi Chen, right? Before I could answer, she looked me up and down and continued. You're just some trash who slept her way into Frank's bed for money. Do you really think that makes you Mrs. Chen? My eyelashes fluttered down. When I looked up again, my eyes were brimming with tears, but I held my head high, refusing to let them fall. Ms. Yi, don't you dare make things up. Dawn Yi laughed as if she'd heard the funniest joke. Me? Make things up? People around us started chiming in. If Dawn hadn't been studying abroad, you wouldn't have been able to sneak in. Frank would probably be proposing to her by now. Exactly. Dawn is Frank's one true love. What are you? I was a little stunned. Dawn. So, Dawn Yi was the Dawn in Frank's heart? I looked at Dawn's face, a lump forming in my throat that I couldn't swallow. The doors to the banquet hall opened again, and Frank walked in, surrounded by a group of people. He was in a sharp suit, his chiseled face expressionless, his dark eyes inscrutable. I hunched my shoulders, trying to make myself as small as possible. But he still spotted me instantly. Dawn's joyful voice rang out, Frank, I knew you'd come to my welcome home party. Frank raised a hand, cutting her off, his gaze cold. Excuse me, Ms. Yi, I'm here to pick up. I shot him a fierce glare while no one was looking. He changed his tune mid-sentence. I was just in the neighborhood. Don's face lit up. His attitude only served to confirm the rumors that he didn't care for me. The crowd started gossiping about the conflict between Don Yi and me, seemingly hoping he would side with her and reprimand me. Frank lowered his gaze, his expression cold, but he said nothing. In the silence, I shot him a few pointed looks, signaling for him to say something. Under my insistent gaze, Frank cleared his throat. Annie, you better remember your place. We'll deal with this when we get home. As he finished, a faint blush appeared on his cheeks. My defiant tears clung to my eyelashes, about to fall. Frank, we're married. You should give me some. Kneel. Frank's knees instantly buckled, and I quickly steadied him. That command wasn't from me. Mr. and Mrs. Wang were having some sort of argument, and Mrs. Wang's voice boomed through the hall. Fortunately, in that moment, everyone turned to watch Mr. Wang drop to his knees, and no one noticed that Frank had almost done the same. Someone in the know turned back and whispered. I heard Mr. and Mrs. Wang have been childhood sweethearts for years, but his secretary got some ideas about breaking them up. Well, Mrs. Wang found out. Someone else muttered. The other woman deserves to burn. I nodded in agreement, only to find everyone's eyes on me. Wait, why are you all looking at me? This party was more for networking, and soon the group of heirs and socialites opened a few bottles of fine wine and sat down in a circle. As an outsider, I was ostracized, huddled in a corner. Several times I caught Frank's gaze, full of unspoken words, but I pretended not to see. A cool night breeze blew in from the balcony, and I tightened the thin shawl around my shoulders. Frank, who had been listening to the others, paused and tossed his suit jacket to me. Seeing the questioning looks from the others, Frank coughed and said coolly, I'm hot. You hold this for me. I put on my best pathetic yet defiant expression. Then, I promptly draped the jacket over my shoulders. Don Yi, looking at the jacket on me with some dissatisfaction, said softly to Frank. Frank, I'm a little cold. Frank just gave a faint "oh," and nothing more. Dave, the second son of the family, saw this and couldn't help but chime in, Don's back, Frank. Stop being so stubborn. Yeah, we all know you. Frank frowned, cutting them off. Who's Don? Everyone in the room froze. Dave pointed blankly at Don Yi. The furrow between Frank's brows deepened. Isn't her name? She changed her name, but Frank, the Don you were talking about. Hearing the name Don, Frank instinctively glanced at me, his back ramrod straight, a hint of nervousness in his eyes as he cut Dave off again. Don't talk nonsense. For a moment, the expression on Don Ye's face shifted through several shades, growing uglier and uglier. I swayed to my feet, a single tear rolling down my cheek. So it's true. You've never forgotten her. Frank rubbed his temples, looking like he had a headache. After giving his friends a warning glare, he put his arm around my shoulder. You're drunk. We'll talk about this at home. The moment we stepped through the door, Frank knelt down without me having to say a word. But I didn't even look back at him. I went straight upstairs to the bedroom to pack my bags. Seeing that something was wrong, Frank chased me upstairs. Looking at my packed suitcase, he wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. His prickly, short hair tickled my cheek, and I couldn't help but shy away. The strong arms around my waist tightened. Annie, what do you think you're doing? Frank asked, his tone hurt. The light was dim, and I could only vaguely see the sharp line of his jaw. I turned, and my moist lips brushed against his earlobe, making him shiver. In this charged, ambiguous atmosphere, I spoke with a calm expression. I'm only going to ask you one question. Who is Dawn? Frank still avoided answering. I poked him with my finger. Fine, you stubborn idiot. I'm not stupid. My name is Annie. My family nickname has always been a play on that, meaning early bird. Dawn wasn't a huge leap. The housekeeper's voice called from downstairs, and I didn't hesitate to push him out the door. The next morning, when I was dragging my suitcase out, Frank was eating breakfast. "Annie, where are you going?" "I'm running away from home," I said frankly. His eyes darkened, and his lips pressed into a thin line. He stared at me for a long moment before saying reluctantly, "Well, come back soon. We'll see how I feel." The company car was already waiting at the door. I turned and got in without a second thought. Through the car window, I saw Frank standing there, not moving, his head bowed like an abandoned puppy. I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. What an act. My contract is with his company, and he's the one who arranged my manager and assistant. My manager would have definitely told him about this shoot starting. The journey was long. I sat in the car, rereading the script I had practically memorized 6 months ago. Because of the movie's sensitive subject matter, my contract with director Lee was signed, but the film was stuck in review. Worse, because I was a new actress, I had signed an exclusivity clause for my debut, which meant that when the film got stuck, all I could do was wait at home. Thankfully, things changed. The restrictions on this kind of genre loosened up a bit, and director Lee immediately reassembled the team to start filming. Seeing director Lee again after 6 months, we exchanged pleasantries, and then he had me do a screen test. It was for the same part one had struggled with before. But this time, director Lee was very satisfied with my performance. "I was worried you wouldn't be able to find that feeling of insecurity mixed with hard-won pride, but it looks like you've made huge progress. These 6 months weren't wasted." I lowered my head and smiled. I had that group of Beijing socialites to thank for the practice. Honestly, before my family's company went under, my life was smooth sailing. Other than my rivalry with Frank, almost no one dared to give me a hard time. So I had never really felt what it was like to be belittled or ridiculed. However, the character I was playing was a poor student who accidentally enters the world of high society. Before she comes into her own, she's constantly propping up her self-esteem in front of the rich, not realizing they see right through her, see her as a joke. When I first tried to play this character, I studied a lot of similar cases, but when director Lee watched my performance, he felt something was still missing. It wasn't until I was being stared down by those discriminatory gazes that I understood what my performance was lacking. It was the subconscious flinching. My privileged upbringing had given me confidence. I was poised and self-assured, I looked people in the eye without fear, and I did whatever I wanted. But the main character had heard a lifetime of negativity and insults. The self-esteem she propped up on a foundation of extreme insecurity was bound to be a paper tiger. So when faced with certain people and situations, she would always instinctively flinch away. With a deeper understanding of the character and director Lee's guidance, the filming process went fairly smoothly. But to prevent any other surprises, the shooting schedule was tight. We worked from morning till night, a full, exhausting day. Back at the hotel, after a quick shower, my eyelids were too heavy to keep open. The room was Spartan, not as warm as home. I curled up in the blankets and, in a daze, hugged a source of heat. When I woke up, I saw clearly that Frank was sleeping beside me. I don't know when he got to the hotel. His eyes were closed, and he was lying half reclined, looking weary and tired. His breathing was light and even, and his messy hair covered his forehead, making him look surprisingly well behaved. I watched him quietly for a long moment, but I couldn't resist the urge to be mischievous and pinched his nose. Frank struggled awake, and I beat him to the punch. "How did you get in my bed?" Frank looked guilty for only a second before retorting righteously, "You're my wife. Whose bed am I supposed to be in if not my wife's?" I pulled a robe over my shoulders, gave him a brilliant smile, and said, "In Dawn's bed, of course." My words shut him up. He looked like he wanted to say something but, under my unwavering gaze, swallowed it back down. He pulled the covers over his head and played dead. A knock came from the assistant, Kathy. I answered, then quickly got washed and dressed to go to makeup. In the dressing room at the studio, I closed my eyes for a quick nap while the makeup artist worked on my face. My assistant, Kathy, was typing furiously on her phone next to me. "When did Frank get here last night?" "Mr. Chen arrived at 3 in the morning. He was afraid of waking you, so he had me open the door for him. I tapped her on the forehead. You little traitor. I fed you that cupcake yesterday for nothing. Kathy gave me a goofy grin and stuck out her tongue. After my makeup was done, Kathy quickly handed me the pork and century egg congee she had bought earlier so I could get a few sips in. I was drinking through a straw when I suddenly heard someone call my name. I turned to see the male lead of the film, my high school classmate, William. He was discovered by a talent scout back in school and was now a household name, a Best Actor award winner. Noticing the wedding ring on my finger, William asked in disbelief, "You're married?" I fiddled with the ring and smiled, my eyes crinkling. Yep. There was a moment of silence, then William forced a smile. I just never thought you'd get married so early. I remember when I confessed my feelings to you back then, you said you would never like someone who liked you first, that there was no challenge in it. Half joking, half serious, William added. On my way here, I was actually thinking I might still have a chance. My gaze went distant for a moment. Did I really say that in high school? Thinking back, I did recall some scenes. I was reading a novel back then and loved imitating the main character's every move. I thought her attitude of only wanting to challenge the impossible was cool, so I used that line to reject a whole bunch of people. Thinking about it now, my teenage self was so cringy it's painful to remember. Kathy glared at the man in front of her who was trying to steal her boss's wife. She stood up like a soldier facing an enemy, blocking William's view of me. Seeing Kathy's nervous state, I wanted to laugh. William sidestepped her, still waiting for my answer. Since we had to work together for the foreseeable future, I decided to be diplomatic. We still have the chance to work together on this movie, I said tactfully. After filming started, I constantly felt a pair of eyes following me. After a scene, I scanned the area and, sure enough, saw a familiar figure under a tree. Kathy came running over with a jacket. William smoothly took it, intending to put it on my shoulders, but Kathy snatched it back nervously. William, it's okay, I can handle this. While the two of them were fighting over the jacket, Frank strode over, opened his black wool coat, and wrapped me up entirely inside it. Caught off guard, I lost my balance and threw my arms around his strong, lean waist to steady myself. Through his thin shirt, I could feel the warmth of his body. The set was noisy, but all I could hear was the thunderous beating of my own heart. You too. William gasped. In his shock, the cup his assistant had just handed him fell straight to the ground. In the darkness of the coat, I struggled to poke my head out to say something. But Frank quickly pressed my head down, hiding my face in his chest. His bottomless dark eyes swept coldly toward William, a scrutinizing look in them. Frank, you and Annie, how could you two? William's eyes darted back and forth, his voice filled with astonishment. Hearing this, Frank raised an eyebrow, a slight curve appearing on his lips. He drawled leisurely. Annie is my wife. It's no wonder William was so shocked. If you had told the high school version of me this would happen, would have died before believing it. I met Frank when we were very young. He was from Beijing and was staying with his mom at his grandpa's house in Shanghai. After he stomped on my sandcastle, I punched him, he tattled on me, and I got in trouble. So I punched him again, he tattled again, and I got in trouble again. And so, the feud between us grew bigger and bigger. Every time we met, we had to trade insults as a sign of respect. But because of school, he only came to visit for a few days during winter and summer breaks, so we didn't see each other much. Who would have thought that in middle school, he would transfer to Shanghai and end up in my school? From fighting over class rankings to competing for the most popular student award. Even for the school beauty pageant, he submitted a photo of himself in a dress as a kid just to compete with me. He snatched things from me, I snatched things from him, and the conflict escalated. It got to the point where if he said 1 + 1 = 2, I would have to prove that 1 + 1 = 3. Our teachers talked to us several times, hoping we would make peace. They were afraid one day our conflict would blow up into an all-out school war and bring shame to the school. Even when I went to the temple with my dad to pray, I prayed for Frank to have bad luck soon. Who would have thought that now, I'd be the one relying on him to get by? With a clap of thunder, pea-sized raindrops began to pour down, turning the outdoor set into a mud pit. The sudden downpour disrupted our original filming schedule, and we had no choice but to wrap up early. On the way back to the hotel, Kathy pressed her face against the foggy car window and sighed with regret. "Annie, we can't get that nutty sticky rice cake from the west side of town that you wanted to try. I was planning to go buy it for you today." The pitter-patter of the rain was incredibly soothing. As she spoke, I was lazily leaning against Frank's broad shoulder, half asleep. I didn't quite hear her, just mumbled a vague mum in response. When I got out of the car, a blast of cold wind made me shiver, and I was instantly awake. Figuring I had nothing to do back in the room, I got a few of the main crew members together for a game of cards in the hotel lounge. Frank strolled leisurely behind me. Seeing me getting closer and closer to William as we talked, a hint of annoyance crossed his nonchalant face. He reached out and grabbed my collar. In a flash, I was pulled into a room. My back was against the hard door panel. Frank's arms trapped me, caging me in his embrace as he leaned in closer and closer. His voice was low and strained. "Why do you keep looking at him? You've already watched his movies so many times at home." His warm breath fell on my neck, sending shivers down my spine. I deliberately provoked him. "Because he's handsome." The color in Frank's eyes deepened, and his hot palm settled on my waist. His rough thumb tilted my chin up, our noses touching. His dark pupils met mine, and he said in a low, husky voice, "Are you still going to look at him?" I blinked, my expression innocent and confused. "You're not jealous, are you?" He closed his eyes, his tongue pressing against the inside of his cheek. He raised a hand and messed up my hair, saying through gritted teeth, "Fine, go have your fun. I have to go out for a bit." Actually, what William and I had been talking about was all the gossip surrounding me and Frank back in school. By the time I sat down at the card table, they had already played a few rounds. William didn't know how to play, so he pulled up a chair next to me and continued telling me gossip. I listened with one ear while keeping an eye on the game. Getting excited, William slapped his head, opened his phone, and after a long search, finally found an ancient forum post. "Frank stared at Annie's back for half an hour yesterday. Is he secretly in love with her?" Secretly in love? More like secretly plotting her assassination. But who stares at someone they hate for half an hour? I'm voting for Frank being at Sundra, who's just pretending not to care. I admit Annie is pretty, but she's not good enough for our Frank. Who are you to say if she's good enough? I think there's a certain longing in Frank's gaze. Haven't you guys heard of frenemies? Frank must be deeply in love with Annie. Amidst the noisy speculation, Frank himself made an appearance in the thread. "If I ever fall for Annie, may I never be a real man." I had just finished reading that sentence. Before I even had a chance to comment, a chill ran down my spine. Frank's hair was damp from the rain, his pant legs were soaked, and his tailored coat was heavy with moisture. He irritably placed the item in his hands on the table. Kathy winked at me. "Just now, Mr. Chen specifically took me to buy sticky rice cakes for you, Annie. He knew you wanted some, so he went out in the rain to wait in line. Isn't this the most beautiful love story ever?" A blush crept up Frank's ears, and his sharp jawline tensed. His voice was a bit stiff. "What love story? I'm only nice to her because she's my wife. It's not like I like her." Right, I said casually, taking a bite of the sweet, soft sticky rice cake. I turned my head. 4 twos. I win. Even though I was just agreeing with him, Frank seemed to get angry. His phone rang, and he turned and walked away, phone in hand. His back was straight and confident, but his steps were heavy, as if he were stomping out his frustration. The group, enjoying this rare chance to relax, played cards until nearly 2 in the morning before breaking up. I stretched, and when I looked around, Kathy had disappeared again. Figuring she might have something to do, I didn't look for her. I started walking back to my hotel room, conveniently heading in the same direction as William. Passing through the hotel lobby, I was surprised to see Frank hurrying out with his luggage. Kathy was looking up at him, chattering away at his side. She was having trouble keeping up with his long strides and tugged at his sleeve in frustration. Frank smiled down at her helplessly and slowed his pace to match hers. I watched as the two of them got into the low-key, luxurious Maybach parked at the entrance. William looked back at me, hesitating, and stammered, they. I lowered my gaze, my expression unreadable, and shook my head gently. Let's go. The next morning, Kathy rushed back to the hotel. She was shaking her head, yawning non-stop. I playfully poked her on the head. You look exhausted. Were you out robbing graves last night? Kathy giggled, forcing herself to wake up. She pulled a black leather-bound notebook from her bag and handed it to me. She leaned in and whispered in my ear, I stole this from Mr. Chen. Be careful when you read it, don't let anyone else see. I couldn't help but chuckle and pinched her chubby cheek. Good girl, Kathy. My little double agent. I didn't spoil you for nothing. Kathy winced from my pinch, rubbed her eyes, and went into the room to catch up on sleep. My scenes for the day weren't until the afternoon, so I had plenty of time. I leaned back on the sofa to inspect the treasure Kathy had procured for me. Page 1, It was filled, wall to wall, with my name. I looked at it so long I almost forgot how to read Annie. Page 2 got to the point. Written in big characters were the words Contract Marriage Seduction Guide. I suddenly remembered the prenuptial agreement Frank had made me sign with a cold face before our wedding. Could he have gotten the idea from a classic billionaire romance novel? Not sure. Let's keep reading. Frank's handwriting, like the man himself, was strong and forceful. His notes were neat and organized, like class notes. But the content was jaw-dropping. The 3 rules prove I'm a man of principle: ignite Dawn's desire to conquer me. Share a bed, keep working on my pecs and abs. Dawn seems to like abs more. Pretend to be drunk, a little tipsy, a lot of cuddles. Don't get too drunk, or I'll slip up. Hero to the rescue, waiting for Dawn to give me a chance. Divorce, no, absolutely not, cross this out. The party must keep Dawn away from Dave. That big mouth. What if he tells her I've had a crush on her for years? Find out her likes, let me be proud for a second. I don't even need to ask. Dawn likes fresh bamboo shoots, sashimi, light-colored clothes, and her water lukewarm. So I was right. The Dawn he loves is me. As for why he likes me, I'm this awesome. It's only natural that he likes me, right? I flipped to the next page, giddy with delight. The days flew by, and filming progressed at a rapid pace. The day we shot the final scene, Director Lee got completely drunk, overjoyed and disoriented. But who would have thought that the world would turn upside down overnight? The film was once again restricted due to its theme, and several streaming platforms that had been in talks with us pulled out. Seeing all our hard work about to go down the drain, Director Lee almost had a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. A dark cloud hung over every single person in the cast and crew. When I got home, I hadn't seen Frank for days. He was so busy he was practically living at the office. I always thought of him as a lovesick fool. I'd almost forgotten he was actually a domineering CEO. One day, Frank came home briefly to grab a prized calligraphy scroll he kept in his study, then rushed off again, disappearing for several more days. It wasn't until an invitation to the Brilliance Awards arrived at our house that I realized he had given that scroll to the venerable Mr. Yen of the film industry, begging him to intervene on our behalf. The Brilliance Awards is a top-tier film festival, a high-class venue for securing investments and networking. Their invitations usually only go to A-list celebrities or actors with breakout potential. For our film to be selected for the Brilliance Awards was enough to show all the platforms that this movie could make money and wouldn't be a risky bet. On the day of the awards, all sorts of socialites and film industry moguls mingled, dressed to the nines with champagne glasses in hand. I held up the hem of my dress and met Frank's gaze with a smile. "Frank, why are you so good to me?" His ears turned red, and he retorted, "Don't get the wrong idea. I don't like you. Yes, yes, of course, I said, my tone indulgent. You paved the way for me, invested in my movie, ate with me, slept with me, all just to humiliate me. Frank had already looked exhausted while he was networking outside. He pinched the bridge of his nose and sat down on the sofa in the lounge. I knelt in front of him, my voice sincere. Thank you for doing so much for our movie. Frank's eyes flashed. He suddenly sat up straight and said coaxingly, I only did these things because you're my wife. So, what should you be thanking me for? I nodded as if in a sudden realization. In that case, why should I thank you at all? You got what you deserved when you married me. I bickered with him, then picked up a nearby bottle of wine, poured myself a glass, and took a sip. Frank frowned, exhausted. Finally giving in to his fatigue, he asked for my permission before lighting a cigarette to wake himself up. The door to the lounge suddenly opened. A few rich kids walked in, and one of them looked me up and down. His signature Sampiku eyes looked extremely familiar. As he got closer, I suddenly remembered seeing him once when I went to pick up Frank. He was drunk and harassing a young girl. I stepped in, he cursed me for being a busybody, and I, very accidentally, kicked him hard enough to break his leg. Now, a twisted hatred flashed in his eyes. He said maliciously, You're letting this woman drink sitting down. It tastes better when they kneel. A few muffled snickers could be heard. I figured they had also heard the rumors about my past conflicts with Frank, so they felt free to mock me in front of him. Frank leaned back on the sofa, a cigarette between his fingers, looking relaxed. He spoke in a lazy drawl. You want her to kneel? Fine. The man's lips curled into a smug grin, but before his smile could fully form, Frank grabbed a wine bottle and smashed it over his head. The bottle shattered, sending shards everywhere. Bright red blood mixed with wine trickled down the man's forehead. Meeting Frank's sharp, dark gaze, he shrank back a few steps. Hearing the commotion, a crowd quickly gathered. The man touched his head and his hand came away covered in blood. His face went pale. Frank, why did you hit me? Frank didn't even look at him. He just lazily waved a hand, and several men rushed in, grabbed the guy, and started dragging him out. You, where are you taking me? Don Yi stood nearby, arms crossed, and said coldly, What's this piece of trash doing making a scene here? You're hurt, so we're sending you to the hospital. Or should we send you directly to the funeral home? After the mess was cleaned up, Don Yi stood by, hesitating, as if she had something she wanted to say to me. I followed her out to the balcony. Don Yi, who always held her chin high with a proud gaze, now seemed fidgety and uneasy. She cleared her throat before speaking. About what I said before, the insulting things, I'm sorry. She glanced up at me, then immediately lowered her eyes to her feet, trying to explain. But you can't really blame me. It was all Frank's fault. He made us all misunderstand. In high school, we went to a New Year's party. He drank a bit too much and let a lot of things slip. He said he liked Dawn and wanted to marry Dawn. In our circle of friends, I was the only one with Dawn in my name. Then I went abroad, and when Dave and the others tried to sound Frank out, he was always evasive, which only confirmed what we all thought. Over time, we all just started treating this unofficial guess as a fact. Perhaps getting angrier as she spoke, Dawn's tone became more impassioned, her eyes full of unspoken curses. I really thought he'd had a crush on me all those years. I turned down guys who pursued me abroad because I didn't want to betray his feelings. Turns out, I wasted all these years for nothing. Luckily, I'm going back to the US next week. When I get back, I'm going to get a boyfriend. No, I'm going to get 10 boyfriends. The leaves of a potted plant by the balcony door rustled, and I could vaguely see someone hiding behind it. I suppressed a laugh and swirled the wine in my glass. Dawn finally vented all her pent-up frustration and seemed much calmer. Then she looked at me with bright eyes and said with certainty, Actually, you're the real Dawn, aren't you? Frank burst out, trying to stop her, but it was too late. He closed his eyes, looking utterly defeated. Dave popped out from behind him, gloating. "Frank, what's with that face? Are you that ashamed of your wife? If you hadn't been so stubborn about denying it, we wouldn't have been misled for so long." I narrowed my eyes, looking dangerously at Frank. His breath hitched, and he stammered out an explanation. "No, that's not it. I was young and dumb, I made a stupid vow." He closed his eyes, forcing himself to tell the truth. That if I ever fell for Annie, I wouldn't be able to be a real man. Dave burst out laughing. "Well, what are you going to do now? What if it comes true like the others?" Frank, in his sharp suit that perfectly outlined his broad shoulders and long legs, his handsome face and intense aura, now looked like he was about to collapse, as if his world were crumbling. Donnie asked curiously, "What other vows did he make?" Dave, loving the drama, laughed and said. He said if he couldn't beat Annie in the Campus Star competition, he'd run 20 laps around the track. Later, he tried to get out of it, but his uncle, a regiment commander, came home for a visit and forced him to run exactly 20 laps, not one more, not one less. Before an exam, he said if he didn't score higher than Annie, he would skip his family's trip abroad and do 10 practice exam sets at home. He tried to back out of that one too, but he coincidentally lost his passport, and his aunt, who's a teacher, coincidentally gifted him 10 practice exam sets. After that, he never dared to make random vows again. Ha 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 ha. After hearing the story, Donnie started laughing too. The night wind rustled the leaves, making Frank's figure look even more desolate. I blinked, then decided to tell them the truth. Actually, I was the one who tattled to Frank's uncle. And I bought those practice exams with his aunt. Neither Frank nor I were naturally competitive people, but whenever we were around each other, we had to one-up the other. Our grades, which had been hovering in the middle, were pushed into the top 10 of our year due to our constant rivalry. It put a lot of academic pressure on both of us. When I was stressed from studying, I'd go to the temple and pray for him to have bad luck. When he was stressed from studying, he'd go on the school forums and make bold declarations. Even though I didn't frequent the forums, someone would always tell me how Frank was planning to crush me in some new way. To beat him, I'd lose sleep for days. When I heard he was trying to back out of his vow, I was furious. I happened to run into his Uncle Lou, who was home on leave, and I secretly told him about Frank's broken promise. The next time, his aunt came over to bring us some buns her mother-in-law had made. She mentioned Frank was about to go skiing in Switzerland with his family and asked if I wanted to go. Seeing he was trying to get out of another vow, I got angry and told his aunt about the promise he'd made. His aunt just smiled, went home, and conspired with Frank's mom to hide his passport. Dave patted Frank on the shoulder. "Good news, you don't have to worry about the vow coming true. Bad news, you do have to worry about the vow coming true." It was late in the night. Director Lee, beaming, came over with a glass of wine to thank Frank. That evening, he had secured a cooperation agreement with Blue Stream, the country's largest streaming platform. Our movie was given top priority and would be released soon. With everything settled, I felt a sense of relief. The party ended at 11. Driving 3 hours back to our Lakeview villa at this time wasn't realistic. Fortunately, the Chin family's main residence was nearby, so Frank called ahead to let them know we were coming. Pushing open the villa door, we saw a light had been left on in the living room. I braced myself against the wall to take off my high heels, but Frank was already crouching down, his hand on my ankle. "Don't move." His voice was slightly hoarse. His well-defined fingers gently traced a red mark on my ankle. It was a little itchy, a little sore. I kicked my foot impatiently, urging him to hurry up and get my slippers. Frank lowered his eyes and said, "Okay." After changing into slippers, I reached up and grabbed Frank's tie. I pulled it, inch by inch. Standing on my tiptoes, our noses touched. I watched the blush spread from his cheeks to his earlobes. "Frank, just what are you trying to do?" His eyelashes trembled, and his eyes seemed to hold starlight. His cool lips fell on mine, lingering tenderly. His fluffy short hair brushed against my cheek, like a little puppy. Dawn, I really, really like you, Dawn, Dawn. I managed to resist the urge to kick him. My name is Annie. But you're my Dawn. I opened my mouth to say something, but my ears caught the faint sound of footsteps. I stiffly turned my head toward the living room and saw Frank's mother and Kathy holding hands, looking at each other with unconcealed excitement. We shipped it. We shipped it. I quickly pushed Frank away, my cheeks burning. I had the sudden urge to flee the planet. Frank's mother smiled and took my hand. I figured you two would have a little something to drink tonight, so I made some hangover soup for you. It's hot, just came off the stove. Drink up and go to bed early. Thank you, Mom, I managed to say, holding back my embarrassment. Kathy sat across the table, her face cupped in her hands, her eyes sparkling like stars. She called out to Frank, Mr. Chin, come on. Frank's mom gently tapped Kathy on the head. We're at home, you don't have to call him Mr. Chin. Kathy giggled and shook her head at me. I bet you didn't guess, sis. I'm his sister. Frank walked over, pulled out the chair next to me, and explained, she's my aunt's daughter, my cousin. She heard somewhere that you were going to be in a movie and begged me to let her be your assistant. Kathy's eyes were shining. Auntie told me. She said this way I could ship you two up close. She puffed out her chest, looking quite proud. I've been a fan of your ship for 6 years. Frank's mother's eyes crinkled in a gentle smile. I've been a fan for 10 years. I stared blankly, a look of bewilderment on my face. Frank and I had been married for just over a year. 10 years ago, Frank and I were in middle school. It was as if I suddenly understood why Frank had transferred from Beijing to Shanghai for middle school. So the origin of my life or death rivalry with Frank was his own mother. Sensing the hint of grievance in my gaze, Frank's mother coughed lightly and took Kathy's hand. It's getting late. Kathy and I will head up. You two take your time. There's more in the kitchen if you want. She walked away gracefully and quickly disappeared from sight. Frank lazily rested his head in the crook of my neck and sighed softly. Good thing my mom has such great foresight. She picked out the best wife in the whole world for me. I shot him a look and snorted. I seem to remember a certain puppy who told me every single day that he would never, ever like me. I called him a dog, and he deliberately rubbed his fluffy head against my cheek. As if he were proud of it instead of ashamed. Lying makes you a puppy. So every time this puppy said I don't like you, he really meant I love you.